Hello and welcome to the International Mentoring Community, All Things Mentoring Lounge. This is Dr. Stephen Hobbs, and with me is Doug Lawrence. We are the co-founders of the International Mentoring Community, and we'll be sharing this broadcast with you. And today we're going to be taking a look at some of the important tools and techniques for mentoring. There'll actually be 7 that we'll dig into a little bit more, but there will be some others that we're going to discuss as well. So this is about tools and techniques, and we want to dive into them just to give you a bit of a broad sense, but a layered look at how these tips and tools and techniques and technologies, that's expanding the 2 T's to 4 T's now, how they are of use to you as a mentor, and your encouragement of the mentee to learn them as well. So with that, Doug, why don't we just introduce ourselves, the International Mentoring Community, and then we'll get into a definition of mentoring and get us going for today's broadcast. So over to you.
So I'm Doug Lawrence. I'm one of the co-founders of the International Mentoring Community. I also have my own company called Talent C that is focused on all things mentoring. I am with the International Mentoring Community. I am the Director of Practice and Outreach.
And I'm Stephen Hobbs. I am the other co-founder. I'm the Director of Education and Certification. So if you're coming through, then I'm going to take a look at the certification process that you're going to be involved with. And Doug certainly brings you into the community and gets you set up. And I'm not as deep of a practitioner as Doug is, because I'm more involved in this education certification. So if you want to get the deep practice insights, then certainly connect with Doug, and he has his company that he mentioned. I have my own company as well, Wealth Movement, WELLTH. And I deal with the world of olders becoming elders. Yeah, celebrate olders becoming elders. And I know, Doug, you tend to link your mentoring to which area?
Mental health is kind of where my primary focus is right now.
Okay, so that gives a little bit about who we are. And why don't we just go over the definition of mentoring that IMC uses?
Okay, the definition for mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship where the mentor and mentee learn and grow together through personal and professional development.
So in there is that sort of link to tools and techniques, right, Doug? And the basic ones when you learn them, and then through deep practice, you start expanding on each one of those and fine tuning it. That'd be a fair way to look at it?
Yeah, that's very fair, yes.
Yeah, and with that definition, is there anything in particular, I always like to ask you, that you want to highlight today that would bring just a little bit more connection between the definition and what we're talking about?
Well, a couple of things that really stand out for me is the aspect of a two-way trusted relationship. So it's not your typical, if you look back historically, that it was always an older person mentoring a younger person. And fast forward, nowadays we talk about younger people mentoring older people. But at the end of the day, when you really sum everything, you sum all of that up, it's actually a two-way trusted relationship. And the other part is that both the mentor and the mentee are going to learn and grow together. And it's based on personal and professional development. And what I typically like to suggest to people is, let's look at the personal growth side first, because it will become, if it's not addressed, it will become an obstacle or a barrier to moving forward with the relationship. So let's focus on the personal side first, and then we can talk about the professional development, professional development or goal or growth, sorry.
Yeah, so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today sort of hints at using these tools and techniques to do that personal, and then you can use those same tools and techniques to assist the professional. And as I mentioned earlier, but I think it's worth saying again, is that as a mentor, you're going to encourage that your mentee learns these ones as well, because of the two-way trusted relationship arrangement that we are certainly promoting here at IMC. So the two broad action outcomes, and action outcomes are statements that have an action verb that has a particular nuance to it, an action that you're to take, and the outcome is like the noun statement, noun phrase that you want to have as the outcome. So by taking this action and this outcome, you will have an action outcome. You will have achieved what you have set out to do. And in many ways, then, okay, let's sustain it. Maybe we want to scale it. Maybe we want to learn more about it. It just continues to grow. And one of the things that we'll be talking about a little bit later is continuous improvement, continuous learning. That will certainly be next week when we expand on it more. But we'll have a highlight of that near the end of this broadcast today. So of the two broad ones that we want to bring to your attention, and the first one is manage the impact of personal bias on the arrangement. And the second one would manage diverse perspectives within the arrangement. So the personal bias aspect, is there anything you want to share about why we want to manage the impact of personal bias from a practitioner?
Certainly from a practitioner is, I don't want to go into a mentoring session where I have personal bias on what potentially might be the outcome. So I may not, because of past experience or past interaction with this particular mentee, I don't want to go into it and saying, well, this is what happened last time, so therefore it's going to happen again. Because if I do that, then I've formed a bias as to what the outcome is actually going to be, and that's not what we want to see take place.
And that's why we have to be alert, pay attention to the mentee possibly coming in with their bias as well. And it's sort of like, okay, if you fold your arms one way, let's learn to fold your arms the other way as sort of a physical reminder. Oh, hang on a minute, let's be a little bit more open to what's taking place here. The manage diverse perspectives, what are we looking at there, Doug?
From a diverse perspective is, we talk about diversity in the mentoring relationship, and it's going into the conversation that you're going to have with an individual, and being able to be open enough to realize that there are going to be different perspectives, both mentor and mentee, and they're going to be very diverse in nature. I look at diversity and inclusion and all of those things as part of my tools and techniques that I need to be mindful of, and this is no different.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm paying a lot more attention to is if a word with ism comes in, all right, I want to make sure that we're both clear about what that ism is about, because unfortunately, sometimes the ism becomes weaponized, and we have to really pay attention to that from a mentoring perspective. Is how are we using that? The notion of ism wasn't meant to be weaponizing whatever it is you're looking at. It was meant to talk about sort of the quality, experience, the system of whatever that might be. Let me use optimism, right? The state and quality and systems of what it meant to have this hope and faith brought to the foreground. And unfortunately, sometimes you might even hear phrasing, you're just being too optimistic. This optimism stuff is that, come back. Look, let's just take a look at what this ism is about so that both of you can understand the diverse perspectives. But I think it leans into that notion of personal bias as well, does it not, Doug?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So I just bring it to your attention because in the last couple of months, it has happened to me a couple of times where I have to go, let's just pull back and let's just take a look at this and what are we talking about here? so we can be clear and get into the same songbook, into the same song, right? You can still, someone may be soprano, someone may be bass, someone may be alto, but at least we're in the same song and that same songbook, and we're working from that perspective. So those are two broad action outcomes linked to the notion of tools and techniques. Now, you can appreciate we could do a course just on personal bias. We could do a course on diverse perspectives. We can do a course on bringing the two together. Doug, I think that might actually be something we may want to look at at some point in time. I think there's something there for us to take a look at. But let's just look at these 5 T's. We're talking about 2 of them, tools and techniques, but maybe just to list them up. There's the notion of tips into tools, into techniques, into technologies, into transition. Those are like the 5 T's. And I just wanted to alert you to them, because while we're talking about the tools and techniques, they are influenced by the other 3, and the other 3 influence the tools and techniques. But again, it's this language, we tend to talk about mentoring tools and techniques. Some people may use a word like mentoring tips, but most of it's mentoring tools and techniques. So the tips often are like a word phrase. There might be a visual reminder. There may be even a behavioral prompt, like there's these little tips you do. Let me give you an example. And Doug, if you got any, jump in as well, okay? So you might get a word phrase like, when you listen, you learn, which is really great from a mentoring perspective, is hang on a minute, when I listen, I learn. So let's be a little bit more quieter as a mentor and listen to the conversation, listen into what's actually taking place. Now, there's some exceptions to that, because sometimes you don't want a long pause, right? And there might be a question or a clarification that's necessary. But again, it sort of goes to the fact of when you listen, you learn, and that's where you want to be as a mentor. The visual reminders, I tend to sometimes, when I'm thinking about preparing for a mentoring arrangement connection, I might assign sticky notes, and sometimes I may have some notes that I want to remember because of what I'm going into, and I might assign one color for me, another color for the mentee, another color for when we bring it together and the ripple effect that goes with it. And sometimes we forget that, and that's a tip in and of itself, is that from that mentoring, there can be this sense of, well, what happens because of our mentoring conversations, the actions that take place, it does ripple out from there. The other thing is this notion of behavioral prompts. Sometimes what I'll do is sort of like now, I feel like I'm saying too much just about tips, is that I'm sitting here and actually pulling back on my sleeve as my reminder. That's how I do it, is that if I find myself in a certain behavior, I might just pull. No one really sees it. I'm doing it right now just to remind me, okay, time to move on to tools. So again, just living it and sharing with you the way that that I'm doing it. Anything about tips? Anything from your side?
No.
Okay. So again, like I always share with Doug, I'll just do that little pause. If you want to jump in, just jump in. Okay. The tools component is, it can be anything from, do you have a pencil and pen around you with some paper? Those are tools. And sometimes we forget about that, right? Technology is the study of the craft, the study of what it is that you're using. And sometimes we forget, hey, a pencil and a pen is still a technology, right? And are they colored? Like I have colored pens that sometimes, depending on, again, writing notes and how I do things, it's what helps me. But also we have the availability of phones and tablets and computers and things like that, that we can set out. And I'm looking into the big screen at the moment, and in front of me is my tablet. And if I want to, I can pull up a drawing feature. And if there's something I'm thinking I can draw it, and then through share, I can pull it up on the screen, right? And again, we can bring slide presentations and things like that up. Those are tools. The techniques component is when you take it extend it that little bit further. So pens and paper and tablets and phones, and you might say, well, a logbook. Oh yeah, a logbook could be a technique, and it's one that you want to keep entering, and it could be on the computer. It could be by hand. It just depends which way you want to do it. And there's journals and notebooks. Sometimes you can journal on your computer. Sometimes you might just get one of those sort of great little books or notebooks from one of the stores and bring it home and use it to write in. Like over on this side of my desk over here, I got galore of all different kinds of journals because I still like to write on blank paper. There's other people that can pop up their notes section on their computer and off they go. These are techniques that we can work with. But I'd also offer to you is that these videos in many ways are techniques to be able to share insights and ideas and interpretation and investigations. And I don't want to lose that component as well, because here we are using this technique and we don't mention it. No, I'm going to mention it as a way in which to take a look at it.
So the techniques, the logbook is extremely important, because if you have a mentoring practice and you're engaging with a lot of people, it sometimes can be challenging or difficult to be able to keep track of the interaction with so many different people, and what were some of the takeaways that, you know, I have to be mindful of for when we get together the next time, so that I can ask the right questions and sort of prompt them to kind of let me or give me a sense of what it is that they were doing. So logbook entries are extremely important. The aspect of a journal or a notebook, I have one right beside my spot here. Here's something for us to think about, though, is that, do you take notes when you are having a conversation with your mentee? And I've had experiences where I've had mentees shut down on me or tell me straight out, if you're taking notes, I'm done. I'm not talking to you. I don't. And it was a whole issue of trust and confidentiality and all of that. And so all I'm suggesting here is, sometimes you need to understand what the situation is, and sometimes you need to ask the question, do you mind if I take notes?
So I think that brings out the word confidentiality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably a good time to mention it in connection technique, because again, you don't even want to leave your logbooks out. Maybe you're mentoring for the workplace. You don't want to leave mentoring logbooks on the top of your desk or anything like that, or leaving it open on your computer. So it's a good reminder. And I think I actually typed into the show more notes that will be going up with this video. The word confidentiality is a way to remind ourselves of that as well. So that's great. So the notion of technologies, there's a vast amount of technologies that are now coming on board. And technologies I'm talking about would be technologies that does the tracking of mentoring on what's happening, the use of it for pairing, the use of it for finding a mentor. And I'm talking maybe bigger programs, all right, the technologies. But it's interesting if you can use the notion of the technology of Google sometimes to go look for ideas about mentoring. And sometimes it may be to go see if I could find a mentor and using it as well, like the Google aspect of it. But there is these technologies. And Doug, you've done a lot of work in looking at various softwares, all right? And now people are moving into the app version of that, so you can walk around with your phone and create, you know, the logbook on your phone, for example, is the advancement of technologies. Anything you want to add there?
Just that, you know, a lot of the research that I did had identified, and I'm just trying to remember the exact number, but suffice it to say that what the research was suggesting or supporting was that when you reached a certain number of pairs, matches, that it may be more prudent to use a technology, a software program to actually do the matching for you, versus you trying to do it or doing it in a manual capacity. And I've done that. We've had one of the programs that I helped implement, we had about 100 matches, so 100 pairs, And it took us a long time to actually go through and match. Because if you can imagine, that's, even at 100 pairs, that's 50 mentors and 50 mentees, and you're trying to go through all their application forms to be able to figure out, well, do I put Sally with Bob, or what sort of thing do I do? So there's a break point that you need to sort of just take a look at when you hit that break point and sort of say, okay, do I want to make that investment? Because like you've pointed out, there's other benefits of the software solution for mentoring, in that, there's the tracking, you can create a community. There's a whole array of different things that you can do. But for me, it's always driven by how much time, effort, and in some cases money, but mostly how much time and effort do I want to expend on the matching part? And if it's not very much, then I should be looking at a software solution.
Correct. Okay. And some people have reached out to us and said, which one do you recommend? And our answer is, you got to do your due diligence. You're going to have to take a look, because A has this and B has this and C has this. And maybe if we're talking about A and you're really looking for C, we don't want to give incorrect insights. So we just encourage you to go out and look at it. And mentoring software usually is a great way to get to all the different kinds of softwares that are out there at this point in time. Now, if we go with tips, tools, techniques, and technologies, the fifth T that I just wanted to mention, and again, this is not going to be a long one, is the word transition, which brings up the senses that there's transaction, transformation, transcendence. So in the mentoring approach that you're using, and using these tips, tools, techniques, and technologies, sometimes it might just be to improve the transaction. Just, oh, there's something I got to learn. Okay, thank you very much. And we just get her done. Another time might be transformation, is that over a longer period of time, using all of these other elements, there's a transformation. And sometimes you might actually experience, whoa, I didn't know we were both going to end up over here, says the mentor to the mentee. Or the mentee may come in and go, wow, I didn't know that this is how far we could actually go, using all the things that we're using here. So I just wanted to bring that up, that awareness, and just to say, it isn't just about getting action A out of this and action B out of this. So sometimes all those actions add up to forming something called a transformation. Some of them can actually get you to a point to send you to somewhere where both of you don't even know where you're going, and you end up there. And that can be a very beautiful experience. So the other core component here to mention in the transition is to remain alert to safety. There is this notion of holistic psychological safety for yourself physically, mentally, might even be soulfully, as I tend to call it, spiritually, wholeversically. Again, depending on how you look at your personal safety, the safety that you're sharing with others. And we've shot a video about that storyline that's in the sequence in our YouTube channel. So you can certainly look up that one, safety, but I think it was worth mentioning it again at this point in time. So we mentioned that there was going to be 7 other action outcome statements. Well, we call these the layered action outcome statements. You might talk about one, but guess what? It links into the second one, and the second one and the first one may link into the third one, or the second one may link into the fourth one, come back to the third one, back to the link. They are like a web. They just sort of interlink all the time. And we're just going to basically go over them in the show more notes, so some more detail, but each one of them is going to be, in a sense, like its own video at some point in time here on our Wednesday broadcast, because I think each one of them deserves a little bit more. And for an example, like the first one is use a question and answer approach. Well, I think you can all appreciate listening in as, okay, question and answer. That's simple enough to, oh, hang on a minute. There is a lot to do with question and answers. There's different kinds of questions. There's different ways in which to give the answers. And sometimes exploring those, because you don't want to use a question and answer system that sort of feels like, well, I got nails and I got a hammer. Well, hang on a minute. There are other ways to fasten, right? There might be a screw and a screwdriver. There might be a wrench and a bolt. There might be, there might be a wooden dowel for wood that's sort of slotted into each other. There are different ways in which to fasten. And I think if you take a look at it from a question and answer point of view, you go, oh, there's more to it than this, right? And I think it's something that Doug and I are going to explore a little bit more. I know Doug always talks about the Socratic question use. And so I want to use an example. So if we have the question and answer right now, as we move into the other ones, you'll start to, oh, right, that question and answer can be used for the next one. And those two could be used for the next one or something like that. So Doug, I know you share a lot about the importance of question and answer. Is there something of real importance you want to share at this point in time?
The only thing I'm going to share is listening and hearing, and how important that is in the use of the question and answer approach is driven by what you listen and hear the mentee say. That will guide where you're going to take the conversation to, where you're going to take it to next.
So often the quality of your question while you're mentoring helps to determine the quality of the mentoring that you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
So always remember that. If you're going to ask a question, make sure it's a great question. Okay, so. All right, the next one is use a hierarchy of values approach, is that each of us has this hierarchy of values. There are things that we value about worth and truth and utility, and it's different mixes for each person. So you as a mentor might have a hierarchy of values, mentee may have a hierarchy of values. If you use this approach of being able to understand what you're working with, it can actually help in the conversation, and it can really help in, guess what? The questions and the answers that you get. So this again is to illustrate that. And you can go online and get access to hierarchy of values assessments. There are written ones that you can send away for and get those done. And but really it comes out through the conversations and where you can bring that forward. So the third one is a principle-centered negotiation. Now, you might go, why would you need negotiation in a mentoring arrangement and connection? Well, sometimes conflict might arise. To the point earlier, maybe the hierarchy of values are, well, you talked about, they may actually clash, and you don't know that they're going to, and that might bring out a little bit of conflict. Something you say or the way you ask your question. That happened to me the other day, and I just went, oh, hang on a minute. I did something that wasn't quite correct for the person. I learned a lot about that. And again, just bringing it up. So this notion of a principle-centered negotiation is you're really trying to get down to that fundamental chain of reasoning that's necessary to make that connection so that you can follow along and use the appropriate action outcome statement that goes with that. And this again is, if the conflict is there, you may have to use a question and answer. You may have to say, well, is this actually a hierarchy of values? Something happened here, and you can go back into it. And then as you learn about the other ones here, maybe it's one of those as well. So it's this notion of really agreeing on the process you're going to work with and have this chain of reasoning, right, available to you if all of a sudden there's a little bit of a grit or grind or a little bang that's happening here, and you've got to take care of it. The next one I wanted to bring out was the notion of feedback, feed forward, and feed fromward. Now, one of those words you probably go, yeah, I got it. What's the other two about? All right, so let me just help you out here. What you're doing is you're learning about the techniques for immediate use that helps you in your response, right, to assist the learning of the mentee. So feedback often is you want to give them something that's happened historically to sort of bring the past into the present. So maybe you're having a conversation and a little bit later you say, look, can I talk to you about how we talked about something and that may have been 10 minutes ago? And so that's what I call feedback and bringing it back to the present. Feed forward might be as identifying something that's happening in the moment and you're going, can I just ask about something, or can I just clarify something, or I have a suggestion for you about what just took place, which is in the immediate. So you're looking at sharing something that's happening in the immediate moment, all right? The feed fromward is when you start to say, okay, what we're talking about actually links to something that's going to be happening. We may not understand it all. The mentee may not understand it all. So there's a little bit of a mystery associated with this fromward component. So it's in a sense like lassoing the future and bringing it into the present to be able to say something like, well, this is really great. And I think it's going to help us deal with, right? And bring that idea back. So, hey, this is really great. I think that's going to really help us deal with how you might be then interacting with your boss when you go back. But it doesn't mean you're going to do it immediately based on what we talked about. We may have to have another chance to talk a little bit more, but it's actually linking to that. So this is really great conversation. That's feed fromward, all right, that you're bringing in. And just have to remember here is that the question and answer hierarchy of values, all right, this notion of principle-centered negotiation are all parts of that, or those wholes of that whole of feedback, feed forward, and feed fromward. The next one, Doug, you've talked to me about this quite a few times, is this notion of the use of reflection. And we got into conversation and I reminded us, well, there's reflecting while you're in it and there's reflecting when you're on it. In other words, taking a step back or afterwards looking at it and reflecting on it. You want to share some more from a practice point of view, how important reflective practice is to the mentoring arrangement. And then I want to talk a little bit of a connection with reflection and formative evaluation.
So I typically, when it comes to reflection, I typically look at it from the aspect of what went well, what didn't go well, and what am I going to do differently next time. And so it's part of my continuous learning. And it's, in addition to being part of my continuous learning, what it also does is it helps me to improve the mentoring process. It helps me with making sure that I am creating a deeper, richer mentoring experience. And what I find is if I stick to that, and what that basically means is if I use as an example, as I'm driving to a mentoring session, I'm reflecting forward. So I'm thinking, what are some of the possible outcomes? What are some of the tools, tips, and techniques that I need to make sure I've got in my toolkit that I can pull out whenever I feel the need to do so. And then what went well. So when I get to the mentoring session and I go through that, I always ask myself, okay, so what went well from this conversation that I had with this mentee, and what am I going to do differently next time in order to make it more benefit or increase it from being beneficial to both parties.
Right. So in there as well as this notion of formative evaluation, evaluating the forming of what's going on. So there are times in the mentoring arrangement where you might want to just check in, evaluate how is the forming doing. Remember transforming, right? That's where we're going. A lot of these actions, transactions are adding up, right? Those smaller ones are adding up to something that we would call transformation. And you want to just check in, and that's when you do a reflective practice. Now, that can actually happen with a mentee as part of one of the times you're together. Why don't we both just have a little reflection here about what just is happened or what is happening, and use it as a time to help the mentee catch their breath, you catch your breath, summarize what's going on, formulate, is there anything there that you need to shift? Words I might use is add, alter, or delete is another way to look at it, and to be able to assist not only the mentoring arrangement, but the formative evaluation, which is in that mentoring arrangement and connection. The next two deal with collaborative conversations. And I'm just going to define collaborative conversation. Conversation is about this notion of a dialogue you're having, you know, meaning flowing through. You are conversing with each other. Sometimes you can get into discussions where you sort of feel like someone is sort of making a point, which is in contrast to like a debate where you're so entrenched in your point of view, you won't go over and look at the other point of view. With a discussion, at least you'll go, okay, let me look at it from your perspective. But a dialogue is, no, we're both looking at it. These are sort of the forms of conversations that you're having. And the collaborative aspect of those conversations is to remember, is my presentation, my participation from a cooperative point of view and an assertive point of view? That's what collaborative is about. Because if I'm not at least asserting my point of view or not cooperating, that isn't collaboration. That's sort of something else, okay? It could be competition, it could be avoidance, right? But what we're looking for is when you're in your mentoring arrangement and connection, you're looking for, I still want to be assertive about who I am, and these are things that I see, this is my hierarchy of values, these are some of my beliefs, but being open enough and cooperate to have the ability to converse in that way that is more dialogue based. Now, there's sometimes you might bring another person into the conversation. So you might use a word like multi-log, right? Again, that's just extending this notion of what conversations are about. But when you're mentoring, it tends to be in a dialogue. But I know Doug sometimes offers mentoring circles where there's a number of people show up. And what we're hoping for is a multi-log. It's a collaborative conversation that has multi ways in which to open up meaning flowing through. And again, it's important to use your action outcome statement as the basis to take a look at the collaboration that's here, right? Is that action verb the one that you want to use? Is the outcome statement that which you want to actually achieve? You can look at it and through that eyes. So that's what using collaborative conversations is about. So all of the ones above are like examples of collaborative conversations. So if this one I'm talking about is number 6, 1 through 5 adds to that, okay? So in a particular way, a collaborative conversation that's used for summative evaluation is there's points or markers, major markers, or the closing of the mentoring arrangement where a summative, a summary is going to take place. So you might end into a conversation about, okay, so what actually happened over, let's use this to close. What is it that we can bring from this? It's a two-way trusted relationship. So what can we do to improve focus and strengthen what's happened while we've been doing this mentoring? And sometimes it can be with the use of forms like the technologies, right? You can fill it out and bring it with you. Maybe you can record it together. So it's on the mentee screen, it's on your screen, someone's typing it in. There's all of these other techniques and technologies that, that you can go with. But really what you're looking at here is how do you sustain and scale the mentoring arrangement? May not be between you two, but then again, it could be is because maybe you might decide through the summative evaluation, why don't we continue? Or it might be how you can be a better mentor, how I can be a better mentee. But guess what? Hey, I'm a mentee with lived experience. Guess what? I think I'd like to become a mentor. And therefore, these collaborative conversations and the summative evaluation way is very helpful to you. So with that, those are the 7 layered, I should say. There's 2 broad, 7 layered action outcome statements. And I think if you go back and listen to these 1 through 7, you'll see how in a sense they're nested inside each other. One can prompt another one that can prompt Another one that gets and understanding these 7 and how they play themselves out. It's sort of looking at like a little bit like, what is it, a kaleidoscope? You look through when you turn it, it shapes, the different shapes going on. That's sort of what I think about with these 7 is that they're working, but they're different combinations. And we might meet today and there'll be this combination. We meet next week, it might be that combination. Next week, it might be that combination, right? These 7, and that's why it's important to stay as close to as possible and have the practice in these 7 action outcomes guided by those 2 around bias and diverse perspectives. So that's sort of a summary point for me, and I think we're drawing to a close. And just before we have Doug close out, I just want to remind you that our All Things Mentoring Lounge takes place on a Wednesday. I'm thinking you might know that you're listening in at that time, or this is a reminder. And it's at 10 a.m. Mountain, Standard or Daylight, depending where we are at what time of the season, but it is a Mountain time. We bring it in usually live, and you can get them on our YouTube channels. You can get them through Facebook in the mental health mentoring page. And I think that sort of covers off how you can get to us. Again, it certainly helps us if you subscribe and add some comments. It helps us just learn as well, and we always appreciate that. As I always share with Doug, is that I'm the one who brings us in, and Doug has the pleasure of taking us out with a reminder or 2. And when I know that he has done, then I will just say take care, and we will stop the recording, and we'll take it from there. So Doug?
So as a takeaway from our conversation today, check your mentoring toolkit regularly. Continually refresh your tools and your techniques to give a deeper, richer mentoring experience.
And with that, take care.